Good morning, everyone. Nice to see you. You can see I'm in a lovely sunny place. Well, virtually there anyway. And um, so it's a nice setting for us to contemplate these things. First of all, let's relax a moment, because as I've said in most of my talks I've given, the mind has to be like a becalmed ocean or a lake, so that the moon and the sun can reflect perfectly. If the water is disturbed, and the images are shattered into thousands and thousands of images, and that's like the mind. So we have to have a calm, tranquil mind when we're absorbing spiritual truths and spiritual ideas. So let's just breathe out and relax. Let's have a few moments of quiet and just get that mind nice and calm and relaxed and at peace, serene. See, it comes and goes. It's magic, pure magic. As you go again, disappears. It's a magic bell. So, Theosophy as a living reality in daily life is today's talk. A theosophical master has written, Theosophy must not represent merely a collection of moral verities, a bundle of metaphysical ethics epitomized in theoretical dissertations. Theosophy must be made practical and has therefore to be disencumbered of useless discussion. It has to find objective expression in an all-embracing code of life, thoroughly impregnated with its spirit, the spirit of mutual tolerance, charity, and love. And that's from Some Words on Daily Life, and reproduced from the Lucifer magazine, January 1888. So it's very important at the outset to realize that the motivation for studying Theosophy is to become better equipped to help our brothers and sisters in their struggles through this earth life. That is the motivation that has to become the basis of all our efforts, if we are able to understand and live a truly practical theosophical life. The masters could clearly see the way the world was going at the time, and almost certainly could ascertain where it would go in the future if this advice was not taken seriously and an attempt to spread the word failed. Well, unfortunately, it was like a voice crying in the wilderness, and humanity continued on its selfish ways, seeking some baubles from the busy marketplace of life, seeking its treasures on earth rather than in heaven, as the Bible tells us to. H.P. Blavatsky wrote in an article, Our Cycle and the Next, if Theosophy, prevailing in the struggle, its all-embracing philosophy strikes deep root into the minds and hearts of men, if its doctrines of reincarnation and karma, in other words, of hope and responsibility, find a home in the lives of the new generations, then indeed will dawn the day of joy and gladness for all who now suffer and are outcast. For real Theosophy is altruism, and we cannot repeat it too often. 'Tis brotherly love, mutual help, unswerving devotion to truth. If once men do but realize that in these alone can true happiness be found, and never in wealth, possessions, or any selfish gratification, then the dark clouds will roll away and a new humanity will be born upon earth. Then indeed, the golden age will be there. So that was very optimistic. But then she gives this warning. But if not, then the storm will burst, and our boasted Western civilization and enlightenment will sink into such a sea of horror that its parallel history has never yet recorded. So we can see from that this final prediction is coming true in many ways. 2 world wars, what's been going through with the pandemic and the lockdowns and many other conflicts that we've had, that these things are all coming true. So all that we learn and understand should only be for the good of the whole. This should be our line of life meditation if we are to put Theosophy into practice. We should develop the power not just to feel ourselves as spiritual beings, but to feel it and see it in others too, and to treat them accordingly as individuals and as groups. It is very easy to see that we do not live in a very compassionate society. It's certainly improved over past centuries with so many charitable organisations springing up, etc. But the very fact that they have to appeal to the public for funding whilst billions are spent on wars and less important things like Olympics and football, World Cups, etc., show that our priorities are wrong. I'm not saying these things are wrong, apart from wars, of course, but we have to get our priorities right, which is more important. The present worldwide economic crisis may be due to the karmic effects of our obsession with money and the belief that it can solve every problem. Society certainly has a love of money, and we all know that the love of money is the root of all evil. Not necessarily money itself, but the love of money. Money, 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 as the song goes. People live and die for bits of metal and paper, which have become the driving force of modern society, and those without it suffer at the hands of those who covet it. Compassion speaks and saith, can there be bliss when all that lives must suffer? Shalt thou be saved and hear the whole world cry? H.P. Blavatsky says in an article, Civilization, the Death of Art and Beauty, materialism and indifference to all save the selfish realization of wealth and power and the overfeeding of national and personal vanity have gradually led nations and men to the almost entire oblivion of spiritual ideals, of the love of nature, to the correct appreciation of things. Like a hideous leprosy, our Western civilization has eaten its way through all the quarters of the globe and hardened the human heart. So in this article, she shows that even in Victorian times, society put wealth before spirituality and nature. Since then, we have gone down from there in some ways. We are certainly not much different. Certainly, in many ways, our hearts have been hardened generally. Of course, there'll always be compassionate souls working for the good on various levels. But the fact that these people stand out so much shows the failings of society in general. Also, we must remember, above all, that H.P. Blavatsky said, we should never despair of the human race. No true theosophist will ever do that. Through the internet and other improved methods of communication, we are becoming more aware of what is happening worldwide. And there is an outpouring of positive reactions to natural disasters or victims of war or acts of terrorism. So we should remain optimistic while being aware of the shortfalls of society at this time and always looking for ways we can help in the task of world improvement, no matter how small is our contribution. We don't have to do massive things, we just have to do what we can on our own level. I must add now, though, that recent events have shown how goodness comes to the fore in people when there's a great tragedy, And people do come together in love, and the fact that we are all one in essence is shown. Attempts to turn us against each other and create antagonism mainly backfires. But there are those weak-willed ones who are affected by these attempts. They're affected by these attempts. But overall, the outcome is positive, though there is terrible suffering for the victims and their families. Roll on the day we can just love each other unconditionally, as Gautama Buddha and Jesus taught. H.P. Blavatsky stated, "Thousands of men and women who belong to no church, sect, or society, who are neither theosophists nor spiritualists, are yet virtually members of that silent brotherhood, the units of which often do not know each other, belonging as they do to nations far and wide apart, yet each of whom carries on his brow or her brow the mark of the mysterious karmic seal, the seal that makes of him or her a member of the brotherhood of the elect of thought. Having failed to satisfy their aspirations in their respective orthodox faiths, they have severed themselves from their churches in soul when not in body, and are devoting the rest of their lives to the worship of loftier and purer ideals than any intellectual speculation can give them. How few in comparison to their numbers, and how rarely one meets with such, and yet their name is legion, if they only chose to reveal themselves." Very profound. It's all a matter of how one lives, not which organization one belongs to or what religion they follow. And the masters said they wanted a universal fraternity, a real brotherhood of humanity started. We should try to make that our motive in all that we do. To do this, we need to take the stance that we are spiritual beings, and that in reality, we are not just creatures of a day, or 25,000 or so days, or a few decades, but eternal beings. This is, of course, the whole purpose of the secret doctrine that H.P. Blavatsky wrote, to show us that very fact. We can get lost in details. The mind can be lost in a labyrinth of words, like a man in a thick forest, as the Crest Jewel of Wisdom by Shankaracharya tells us. So our minds can be swallowed up by details instead of grasping the essence and understanding the motive of the brotherhood of bodhisattvas who revealed it to the world under the guidance of Gautama Buddha, who is said to have initiated the attempt in the last quarter of the 19th century through H.P. Blavatsky. Now the mind is the great slayer of the real, as the voice of the silence tells us, and it finds countless ways to prevent us from seeing ourselves as spiritual beings. It gives us doubts and fears. But in all this, we need to stand firm and remember who and what we really are. It's about awakening. We are what we are always. We just need to wake up, to remember. There's a tendency to separate what we learn in our studies from our actual practice, to take the same attitude to theosophy that we do to studying maths or geography. But it is entirely different, of course. Now again, H.P. Blavatsky is reported to have stated in the Bowen Notes on how to study theosophy, she says, "Come to the secret doctrine without any hope of getting the final truth of existence from it, or with any idea other than seeing how far it may lead towards the truth. See in study a means of exercising and developing the mind never touched by other studies." Now that's an interesting attitude. She is saying that what all the esoteric and even some exoteric teachings say, that the truth is beyond words and can never be encompassed by them. People nowadays revel in learning facts. Our educational system relies on memorizing facts, and even in spiritual traditions, people enjoy sitting back and absorbing facts that often make no difference whatsoever to their lifestyle, though they often imagine that they do. Or they repeat texts, parrot fashion, as many exoteric religions do. She goes on to say that we must keep the idea of the oneness of all things in our minds during our studies and not let any ideas of separateness supervene. She's getting to a state of mind where the teachings are alive. Otherwise, we fall into the dead letter. The main thing is to do as Pythagoras says, and I say quite a lot in his golden verses, and that is to take heart, for the race of man is divine. In Theosophy, we learn about the origins of man and his destiny. We learn that we are now at a stage where we can proceed through self-induced and self-devised efforts. We need to take these ideas and breathe life into them through a conscious love and understanding of our fellow human beings, struggling along with us on this journey. A few years ago, I had an insight whilst walking along the main street in Manchester. I often mention the Bodhisattva Never Despise from the Lotus Sutra. He was a Bodhisattva who lived during a time when Buddhism was going through a rough patch and most monks and nuns were living dissolute lives. So they would mock and even physically attack the Bodhisattva Never Despise as he tried to spread the true teachings. But even after an attack, he would get back on his feet, look at them in the eye and say, I can never despise any of you because you will all be Buddhas someday. And I do use that idea quite a lot in my talks because I think it's a very, very important one. So you've probably heard it before, but I think it's always important to repeat things many times so that they sink in. So on that day, I saw all the people swarming like ants down the street, and I thought, so many people, so many different lives, yet they are all on the same journey at so many different levels. They will all be Buddhas someday. Being Buddhas just means enlightened. They say they'll all be Christ someday, they'll all be Krishnas someday, whatever. It made me realize the truth of Jesus' saying, all I ask of you is that you love others as I have loved you. All I ask of you is that you love others as I have loved you. He also said, love your enemies, bless those that curse you, and pray for those that despitefully use you. And these are also the words of Gautama Buddha, who told us that hatred never ceases by hatred. It only ceases by love. But most of society spends a lifetime believing it is something that it definitely is not. We are always exactly what we are, but clouds obscure the sun. And the society that has grown materialistic and bases its politics and education on the fact that we have just one life, and the secret of success is survival of the fittest, will always stifle the natural spirituality that we all have buried deep within. We need to roll back the stone from the cave and step out into the light. Because no matter how complex our intellectuality is in this world, no matter how great our technology is, our mental state is still mainly an animalistic one in general, in that we are taken up with food, finding a mate, reproduction, and making a nest. Look at all the dating, home building, and cookery programs on TV and the internet. Well, these things are important for the few years we are here, but we must never be swallowed up by them. H.P. Blavatsky says in The Key to Theosophy, if the action of one reacts on the lives of all, and this is the true scientific idea, that it is only by all men becoming brothers and all women sisters, and by all practicing in their daily lives true brotherhood and true sisterhood, that the real human solidarity which lies at the root of the elevation of the race could ever be attained. It is this action and interaction, this true brotherhood and sisterhood, in which each shall live for all and all for each, which is one of the fundamental theosophical principles that every theosophist should be bound not only to teach, but to carry out in his or her individual life. Later, she states how we can achieve this by the enlightened application of our precepts to practice, by the use of our higher reason, spiritual intuition, and moral sense, and by following the dictates of what we call the still small voice of our conscience, which is that of our ego, and which speaks louder in us than the earthquakes and the thunders of Jehovah, wherein the Lord is not. In other words, to live under the guidance of our higher self. Again, she emphasizes the enlightened application of our precepts. There's no use, for example, to become a vegetarian because a book tells you to, or someone coerces you to. Otherwise, you may grow to resent it. You need to feel that you really want to be a vegetarian as a result of a feeling of compassion towards the animal kingdom. This can be applied on all levels. Of course, people become vegetarian for health reasons, but the real motivation should be compassion. As B.P. Wadia, an early theosophist, said, it's a kind of spiritual anarchy that we need. One of the definitions of anarchy in the dictionary is a theory that regards the absence of all direct or coercive government as a political ideal, and that proposes the cooperation and voluntary association of individuals and groups as a principal mode of organized society. A revolution of thought is needed, but it is the kind of revolution advised by H.P. Blavatsky in an article, The Beacon Light of Truth, where she says, I say it again, it is only theosophy well understood that can save the world from despair by reproducing the social and religious reforms once accomplished in history by Gautama the Buddha. A peaceful reform, without one drop of blood spilt, each one remaining in the faith of his fathers if he so chooses. To do this, nothing is necessary but to reject the parasitical growths that have choked every religion and sect in the world. Let him accept but the essence, which is the same in all. That is to say, the spirit which gives life to man, in whom it resides, and renders him immortal. Let each man who is inclined towards well-doing find his ideal, a star before him, to guide him. Let him follow it without ever deviating from his path, and he is almost certain to reach the beacon light of life, truth, no matter whether he seeks for it in a manger or at the bottom of a well. Leo Tolstoy remarked that if Western society had followed the teachings of Jesus, we would have no need for governments, armies, or police forces. We now have made a world in which they are necessary, and coercion takes the place of love and compassion. We need to recover the dignity of being human on this shining globe of ours, and try to find our place in nature, as the secret doctrine tries to show us, for the purpose of becoming natural and recovering our sanity in a world growing more and more insane. Theosophy in action is helping others to awaken from this dream, which often becomes a nightmare for many. But in the center of the storm, there is a calmness that remains unshaken, and we all can find our way to that state. We do not progress by adding, but by subtracting those things that shield our vision. We are already there, but not aware. So the practical effects of studying theosophy should be to give us a deeper understanding of nature and our fellow human beings. We should be better able to grasp the beauty and wonder of life beyond the seeming confusion. The Masters could well see the effects of materialistic science and dogmatic religion at the time and wanted us to gain some insight into the real workings of nature and the universe, so that we could better appreciate others and have compassion for those who stray who, as Jesus said, know not what they do, or is reported to have said. People act blindly, following mainly the eye for an eye doctrine rather than that of love. But as Mahatma Gandhi said, an eye for an eye will make the whole world blind. Theosophy shows us that life on earth is really the most transient aspect of our journey, and in many ways, and for most, the worst and the most painful, physically, mentally, and morally. It is the one stage in which we feel least comfortable. When we move on, we are told that it will be like returning home. We are in places where we feel more at ease with ourselves and all around us. Well, unless you are a really evil person. For 99.9% of us, we are better off. Sadly, reincarnation and karma propel us back into physical existence to struggle and suffer some more, and hopefully learn through all our experiences. But there comes a time of awakening when we can move on to new and exciting realms of being, not vague, dreamy states as they appear to us now with our limited minds, but more vivid and real than our physical life even, or it ever can be. And there's no end to all of this as far as we know. And the higher we rise, the more spiritual and beautiful we become, and more alive, because we are becoming life itself. But it has nothing to do with the tools that we use on earth, words, thoughts, images. These are left far behind, having fulfilled their tasks. We also imagine ourselves as having the same form as we have now and communicating in the same ways. But our forms will be different completely, and modes of communication on higher levels beyond our present comprehension, even way beyond our conceptions of telepathy, which we possess on levels not much higher than the one we are on now. So this gives us a deeper insight into what we will become and the potential of us as humans on the planet now. All this Theosophy reveals to us. And Theosophy in action is to try and treat our fellow human beings and our fellow creatures with love and respect, and to always try to see the good in others and to draw out the best in them in whatever way we can. Physical help, as in the work of charities, is important, along with showing others our place in the scheme of nature, and therefore helping them to respect all living things and living beings. It's all about the sacredness of life and brotherhood and comradeship that will arise as a result of all this. Of course, we have to live in this world and fulfill any duties that we have, and particularly any we have taken on voluntarily, but at the same time remembering what the Bhagavad Gita tells us, that it is better to do one's own duty badly than to do another's duty well. And what may be our duty to ourselves? H.P. Blavatsky sums it up in the Key to Theosophy in an answer to a question. She says it is to control and conquer through the higher, the lower self, to purify ourselves inwardly and morally, to fear no one and naught save the tribunal of his own conscience, never to do a thing by halves, i.e., if he thinks it the right thing to do, let him do it openly and boldly, and if wrong, never touch it at all. It is the duty of a theosophist to lighten his burden by thinking of the wise aphorism of Epictetus, who says, "Be not diverted from your duty by any idle reflection the silly world may make upon you, for their censures are not in your power, and consequently should not be any part of your concern." That's very important. We have to live under the dictates and guidance of our higher self. And this is pointing to the fact that we should not slavishly follow what materialistic scientists and politicians tell us. We have access to a deeper knowledge and therefore a much wider understanding of the nature of life and of being human. So to recap a little, the test is to blossom forth as truly human beings and to gain an insight into the very nature of our fellow pilgrims struggling along the path with us. We may think at times, that with the state of the world as it is, that there is not much that can be done. But it is important to remember that all through history, evil has never had the final word and never will. In Theosophy, we are aware that there is a guardian wall that protects us from far worse evils, though what they might be, I don't know. I don't really want to know. If we take the stance of being immortal beings, souls rather than bodies, then our worldview will begin to widen and we will look at life so much differently. Impersonality is said to be the key. But this does not mean coldness. Robert Crosby writes, an early theosophist, for practical purposes, if we are developing the child heart, if we are learning to love things beautiful, if we are becoming more honest and plain and simple, if we are beginning to sense the sweet side of life, if we are getting to like our friends better and extending the circle, if we feel ourselves expanding in sympathy, if we love to work for Theosophy and do not ask position as a reward, if we're not bothering too much about whether we are personal or impersonal, this is travelling on the path of impersonality. Yet we are those spiritual beings at this very moment now. Our lower minds and emotions are just the clouds that hide the sun that one day will break free and shine on and in us all. This is why Pythagoras told us, as said earlier, to take heart, for the race of man is divine. That is the hope that remains after Pandora's box has been opened. The race of man is divine, so that if the whole planet were destroyed, it would mean little to the true man or woman. If we can somehow awaken to that fact, then we would become beacon lights to all those who struggle in this darkness. Living in the light of our higher self may seem difficult, but that is merely because in this society we have created complexity and lost contact with simplicity. Indeed, to be simple-souled is the most difficult thing of all to be accomplished by most of us. The lower mind shuts out the spiritual life due to its involvement with so much trivia. To repeat what Shankaracharya said, the mind is lost in a labyrinth of words, like a man in a thick forest. That also goes for images too. We need to simplify our lives, return to nature, not just in a physical sense, but also as regards our inner life too. We have created a world of triviality, shutting out the reality. It's important then to try to see things in perspective and never to condemn others, because they may be walking a path we have done before or will have to do in the future, and they are learning their own particular lessons in life. So our attitude should always be to help our fellow pilgrims. As Ram Dass says, we are walking each other home. So the practice of Theosophy consists in doing whatever we can to try to overcome the great dire heresy of separateness that weans us from the rest. Modern society does indeed tend to promote division. That's very evident at the moment, the way the world is at the moment. Even many New Age and self-help groups emphasize self-love. Of course, it is important to love oneself, but as part of society, careful not to regard ourselves as separate from everyone else. H.P. Blavatsky, in her first message to the American conventions in 1888, writes, "Many who have never heard of the society are theosophists, without knowing it themselves, for the essence of theosophy is the perfect harmonizing of the divine with the human in man, the adjustment of his godlike qualities and aspirations, and the sway over the terrestrial or animal passions in him. kindness, absence of every ill feeling or selfishness, charity, goodwill to all beings, and perfect justice to others as to oneself are its chief features. He who teaches Theosophy preaches the gospel of goodwill, and the converse of this is true also. He who practices the gospel of goodwill teaches Theosophy. So true Theosophy and spiritual teaching reveals to us our place in nature's unfolding. It shows us that we are as much a part of nature as a tree or a flower or a bird or an animal. The main lesson is that we are part of the whole, and any idea of separateness is a great heresy, as I've mentioned. The Voice of the Silence by H.P. Blavatsky tells us. This gives us guidelines to live by. We begin to realize our responsibility in the world and indeed our universe. We are not isolated individuals who are free to do as we please, regardless of the consequences of how what we do affects others and the planet itself. It is the one life theory, so prevalent today, and which most people, particularly in the West, use as the basis of their lives. They take on false ideas and ideals based upon that. They shut out any reference to their mortality. I mentioned earlier about the length of life. Well, we're here for only about 1,000 months, 25,000 days or 30,000 days, roughly. We're just passing through in the final analysis. As written again in the Voice of the Silence, we should have perseverance as one who doth for evermore endure, because our shadows come and go, our personal selves. What is within us is eternal. It is the true man or woman for whom the hour will never strike. Those are wonderful words. Have perseverance as one who doth for evermore endure. That's the attitude of mind that we have to develop, that we evermore endure. How amazing and comforting is that, and inspiring. So how does the realization of our spirituality help us to understand more the universal brotherhood of humanity? And more importantly, how does it help us towards a practical realization of that fact? The basic teaching of the Buddhist Lotus Sutra is that all beings have the Buddha nature. We are all on the same journey towards the divine. There is only one divinity, one consciousness that pervades the universe. Consciousness does not develop. It is just that the vehicles that it operates through become more and more refined, allowing more and more of the light of consciousness to manifest. There are beings much higher than us that manifest much more of this universal consciousness. But as it is the same consciousness, we're not separate from them. It's not that we share this consciousness and each have our own separate little part. We are all one. So there's a point in our awakening that is almost imperceptible and indescribable, when we sense the true dignity of human nature and feel a great sorrow at the state of humanity at the moment. In words, it doesn't seem like that I'm saying anything much or new, because it is a feeling, an experience that can never be put into words, because words cannot reach it. They fall far too short. Hints are given in some spiritual and theosophical works, like the Voice of the Silence, when it says, "Let thy soul lend its ear to every cry of pain, like as the lotus bears its heart to drink the morning sun. Let not the fierce sun dry one tear of pain before thyself has wiped it from the sufferer's eye. But let each burning human tear drop on thy heart and there remain, nor ever brush it off until the pain that caused it is removed." We can, of course, admire such words, but they are meant to awaken in us a certain experience, not just remain beautiful words on paper to discuss intellectuality. In his book, The Buddha of Infinite Light, D.T. Suzuki explains the teachings of the Shin school of Buddhism in Japan. He writes about a certain class of devotees named Myokonin. Myo means wonderful, ko means fragrance, and nin means person, signifying someone who manifests the wonderful fragrance of spirituality. These people are not usually intellectual, but are sincere, kind-hearted, and compassionate. There was one man who learned that a temple in Kyoto, 200 miles away, was on fire. It was once a temple he attended and was close to his heart. So he took a large carpet, soaked it in water, and shook it in the direction of the temple. Now, to our minds, this was rather a pointless act and seems foolish. But he was motivated by compassion and was spontaneously led to do something. This kind of act transcends logical reasoning and is difficult for us to understand. But as I said, it was a spontaneous reaction emanating from a compassionate heart. If you have a compassionate heart, you need to do something, whatever. So may love and light guide us all on our journey, and may we all help to walk each other along the never-ending path towards a universal brotherhood of humanity, regardless of race, creed, sex, caste, or colour. And most of all, in this often cruel world, may we love each other and shine our light in all the dark places we come across, and strive always to live in the light of our true spiritual nature. A few moments of quiet. Now, some people may have recognised certain parts from that talk. That's because on this talk, I gathered together a lot of practical excerpts from my other talks that I've given and put them all together in one talk to make a talk called Theosophy as a Living Reality in Daily Life, plus a little bit of new stuff as well. So hope you enjoyed that, and I'll see you all soon, definitely. Just keep going, keep the spirituality alive, keep the light burning in your hearts all the time. These are difficult times, but nothing can touch the spirit. We know that, don't we? We just go beyond to that calm center, the center of the storm, the tranquility that's within all of us, the serenity that we all have. Peace, love, and harmony. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace, peace. Peace on earth and goodwill to all beings.